Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Philip Goad, Chair of the Heritage Council of Victoria. Welcome to the 2024 Australian Heritage Festival, the country's largest community-based heritage celebration. The festival begins on Thursday, the 18th of April, the International Day for Monuments and Sites, and it will conclude on Saturday, the 18th of May, the International Day for Museums. Before I officially launch this year's festival and this webinar series, in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. I wish to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today on the lands of the people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. The 2024 Heritage Festival is delivered by the National Trust and proudly sponsored by the Heritage Council of Victoria. Over the next few weeks, over 500,000 people will experience heritage sites and events around the country. In Victoria, the festival is comprised of events from across the state, organised by National Trust properties and branches, community groups, local councils, traditional owner groups, individuals, and other organisations. The Heritage Council of Victoria is an independent statutory body which recognises, protects and celebrates Victoria's cultural heritage. The Council advises government and others on how to conserve and protect historically important objects and places for the enjoyment of current and future generations. The Heritage Festival is all about sharing with others our passion and our fascination for and with heritage. This year, the 2024 theme is Connections, encouraging celebration of the rich and diverse stories of our nation, strengthening cultural and historical ties and forging new bonds. It acknowledges our link to people, places, and the past, and the enduring connections that will shape the future of heritage. This year's festival also highlights and celebrates the 50th anniversary of state government heritage legislation here in Victoria and the creation of the Victorian Heritage Register. In 1974, after many years of campaigning by Victorian conservation activists, the first buildings were included in the Victorian Historic Buildings Register to protect them for current and future generations. The Historic Buildings Register eventually became what we know today here in Victoria as the Victorian Heritage Register. Victoria was the first Australian state to establish a Heritage Council to recommend the registration of places and objects of state-level significance to be protected by a heritage register. The Victorian Heritage Register provides legal protection for places and objects that are important to the history and development of Victoria. And the register now includes approximately 2,400 places and objects that are significant to the history and development of our state. The register also protects a variety of heritage, not just historic buildings. Heritage can be buildings, objects, collections, archaeological remains, gardens, shipwrecks, and much, much more. The Heritage Festival provides the perfect opportunity for people to see and experience many of the places in the Victorian Heritage Register over the next few weeks. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to experience our state's heritage firsthand, and I'd like to especially extend my thanks to the many, many volunteers who make this festival possible. Please enjoy this month-long celebration of heritage. So get out there and enjoy the Heritage Festival for 2024. Thanks.
When you hear the word heritage, what comes to mind? You might be thinking of old buildings, the wonders of the natural world, or the cufflinks left to you by your legendary great-granddad. The truth is, heritage can be all these things and more. Heritage is what we inherit and also choose to protect and celebrate. Heritage can be many things, such as an object, a building, an archaeological site, a structure, an Aboriginal sacred place, a park, or a garden. Heritage can be old or not so old. beautiful to some and ugly to others. It's heritage that links us to the past and helps shape our sense of who we are, but also who we become as individuals and as communities. Heritage can give meaning to our lives by providing a sense of pride and place in our community. Heritage gives us spaces where our cultures can be shared. It may stay the same or change and can be used in new creative ways. Heritage is sustainable. Small changes to heritage buildings can make a huge difference to energy consumption. It is often more sustainable to adapt an existing building, creating a new life and purpose, than construct a new one. Heritage can be a big draw if you're looking to attract visitors to your town. These are just some of the reasons why it's so important to protect our heritage. If we don't, it's lost forever. So, from local councils to the UN, societies, organisations and governments, all are responsible for the protection of heritage. Determining what heritage is important enough to protect is a complex process, but it's essential work because heritage belongs to all of us. So the heritage system is designed to listen to a wide range of voices. For more information about Victorian heritage and how it is protected, see the Heritage Information Pack accompanying this video.
My talk today is about common misconceptions of heritage. And I'd like to start with this quote. I particularly like this quote. This is from L.P. Hartley, a novel that he wrote in 1953. "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." Historians love this quote because it really is a central element to the emotional part of what historians do in their work. But it also has quite a resonance in terms of heritage, in that the reason that we like things from the past and we feel a connection with and attraction to is very much like the reason that we might go to a foreign country. We like to see things that are different. We like to see things that are not part of our everyday existence. We like to see perhaps different values being reflected. We like to see different tastes. Some of it we may not find that attractive, but some of it we may. And this is very much like the past for us here in Australia and in Victoria in particular. So I think that the connection that is the theme of this Heritage Festival is very nicely told in that quote there by Hartley. Now, this year is the 50th anniversary of the Victorian Heritage Register, and in his introduction, Philip Good unpacked that quite a bit. And I do recall back in the 1970s with the green bans and the buildings being demolished, and those who were courageous enough to stand up in front of buildings at the time. And it's now their legacy that we are enjoying, that we have so many buildings and other places and objects that have been saved. So 50 years is quite a landmark. Now, the Heritage Register isn't just places, buildings, it's various types of places, and it's all sorts of objects as well. So trees, parks and gardens, streetscapes, archaeological sites, precincts, shipwrecks, all sorts of things, the things that we get out of archaeological sites. It can even be everyday items, it can be vehicles. So it's quite a range of things. It's not just about buildings, even though we did start on the register in 1974 as the Historic Buildings Register. The recognition that heritage is far wider than buildings has been embraced by Victoria, and we now recognise several things. I will say as a note here that the Victorian Heritage Register does not include heritage associated solely with Aboriginal tradition, knowledge, law and practices. And that's because these are protected under separate legislation, which is the Aboriginal Heritage Act of 2006. All right, today's talk, 5 common misconceptions of heritage. And I'll just briefly go through these 5 that we keep bumping our head against, I suppose, in various forums. Now, one of them is that the heritage system is complicated. I guess there are some complications, but in essence, it's not really. It's all about levels of recognition. And at a global level, we can consider things like the UNESCO World Heritage sites that are given protection by UNESCO. And we're very lucky in Victoria to have one such site in the exhibition buildings in Melbourne. We only have one at the moment. There may be more to come. At the national level, we have the National Heritage List, and that includes places that are important to the nation. And in Victoria, that includes things like the Flemington Racecourse, and I guess as much as anything, the association with the running of the Melbourne Cup, which, despite being a Victorian institution, has a national resonance. Also, the former High Court building of Australia in terms of colonial architecture, but also in more modern things, and certainly in the current culture, almost on a daily basis, I guess, is the MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. That is also on the National Heritage List. Each state has a heritage register equivalent to the Victorian Heritage Register, and at a state level, that recognises things that are important to the state. At a local level, the councils have heritage overlays that are in their planning regimes, and that helps to protect things at the local level. Once we get to the community level, there are various places and objects that are valued just by that community, or by that community and its connections. So they might have a small museum at a social club or something like that, where some of their most cherished objects are. And then at the family level, there are things that we as families consider important places. The place we used to go for holiday when we were a child, objects that are valued by the family. And I, in fact, have one here. This is a watch that's been passed down through my family, and it's a lovely silver thing from about 1720, and it's been passed down from eldest son to eldest son through several generations. And I'll pass that on to my son, and he in turn will pass it on to his son. And that's just a small thing. It's not anything of great value. You could probably buy one today for a couple of $1,000, but it means so much to my family. So it really is about being recognised at the appropriate level when it comes to heritage. And we have some handy tools for recognising heritage. And in Victoria and in other jurisdictions, we use criteria. And I'll just have a look at these briefly now. We use 8 of them in Victoria for the Victorian Heritage Register. Criterion A, that's important to the course or pattern of Victoria's cultural history. So they're those things that have really shaped Victoria and helped to make Victoria what it is and helped to make Victorians who they are. Criterion B, we're talking about things that are rare, uncommon or endangered aspects. So some of the things that may have been common once, but there are very few left, or they may have been rare in their day. They might in fact have been unique, but they are worthy of preservation. Criterion C, ones that are able to yield us information. So this can be various things. It might be things in an archaeological site, things that are still buried that we haven't pulled up yet, but it might also be an object that's in absolute plain view, but we haven't analysed it yet. The grade of steel that they used for making a particular bridge, why has it lasted so long? What can we learn from the composition of the steel in that case that we can apply from now on? Criterion D, they demonstrate the principal characteristics of a class. So it might be the best of whatever type of building it is, and something that we should set aside as an example because it stands out so well in the type of building or object that it is. Criterion E, things that have aesthetic characteristics. These are things that appeal to us, that we just don't want to see go because we find them so attractive. And generally, these things will be the best of a particular type or quite rare. Criterion F, they demonstrate a high level of technical achievement. Our society runs very much on technology now, and in the past that's always been the case, but the technology might be obsolete now, but at the time it may in fact have been groundbreaking. And for us to celebrate that technological achievement is important. Criterion G, we have some things, places and objects and so on that have a strong or special association with a community. So it will be things that might help define that community, and that community is in fact a significant part of Victorian cultural life. Criterion H, those that have a special association with a person or a group. So somebody from Victoria's past who we recognise as being exceptional at what they did, or indeed notorious for what they did. But we need to keep the objects and places associated with them. So those 8 criteria are what we use to determine what goes onto the Victorian Heritage Register. So the council, despite being a panel of experts, it's not up to their personal preferences or opinion or anything like that. And for these criteria to be used, there are thresholds that are set that determine what is of state level significance. Therefore, it might get on the register, and there are tests that we apply. And I'll talk about one example here, and we'll talk about the Royal Arcade. Familiar to many, I hope. The Royal Arcade there in Melbourne between Burke Street and Little Collins Street, and it's 29 shops of various trades. It's registered on the register under Criterion A to start with. It was erected in 1869, and it's one of the earliest arcades constructed in Australia. And it is one of approximately 18 surviving from pre-1870. Worldwide, that is. The premises were notable for having various traders at the time who were part very much of Melbourne society. So watchmakers and jewellers, photographers. There were Turkish baths there. There was even a doll hospital. Recognised under Criterion B as rare and uncommon. So it is the oldest extant shopping arcade in Australia, and a bit of repetition because it's important in a couple of the criteria, but it is one of approximately 18 surviving from before 1870 worldwide. Criterion D, in that it has principal characteristics of a class, so it draws on the early influences of French and English models, and it's outstanding in its ability to demonstrate those qualities of design in the Australian context. And it continues the tradition that we can still see in Melbourne of having covered shopping streets, some more covered than others, as I'm sure many of us are aware. Criterion E, the aesthetic characteristics. It's in the Italianate style, and it compares very well with the 19th century examples that are in Europe. And it's outstanding in that context in Australia, because it is, well, on the other side of the world from where it originated, and yet it is such a great example. And Criterion G, that it has connection with communities here in Australia, and the tourists come to it. Tourists seek the place out. It's exceptionally well known to visitors to Melbourne who frequent Melbourne on a regular basis. The automata there of Gog and Magog and Father Time people like to go there, see them, take their families there to see it. So it has really become part of the Melbourne psyche, I suppose, Victorian psyche. And several of the groups who were there in the early days, the early tenants, they were Melbourne institutions. Right, so misconception number 2, state heritage is more important than local heritage. And really, it's all heritage is important, and it's about what's important to each of us. So at the world level, I've mentioned UNESCO. There are some places in the world that virtually every culture would say is part of its inheritance and would be particularly concerned to see lost places like Pompeii, Machu Picchu, and so on. They are of world significance. So likewise at the national level, some places I've mentioned, but several others as well in each of the various states. And the state heritage that we recognise here in Victoria helps to define us as Victorians, while the local heritage helps to define us as local communities, and even at the family level, that heritage helps to define us as families. So local heritage being, I guess, more greater connection than state heritage. Yes, we are proud generally as Victorians to feel that we have the MCG on our turf, but it's not in our mind every day. Whereas the places that we frequent all the time, the places that we take our families to, the places that are special to us, those are the things at the local level that are very important. And it was interesting to note from a study that we've done recently looking at the Victorian Heritage Register that, well, a bit of an aside really, I guess, but 53% of the heritage listed places are in regional and rural areas. So that is less than half of it is in the great capital of broader Melbourne, with its far denser population. So out there in those regional and rural areas, the small things that matter to those communities are recognised and are celebrated, some on the register, but many just recognised by the community. The streetscapes, the avenues of honour as you drive into a town and you see those trees and see their significance for wartime heritage. And shopping precincts, workplaces, those things, I guess, are not going to make it to the state level, but gee, they're important to the communities that cherish them. All right, misconception number 3, heritage is always old and just buildings. Well, heritage recognition is all about significance and not about age. And we don't necessarily go looking for the oldest, we go looking for the best, the rarest, the most aesthetic, those with special associations, and in particular, the way that all of these things help us to understand the past. So heritage is all sorts of objects, it's streetscapes, it's landscapes, relics, it is objects, and particularly objects that help us to understand things that are important to Victoria. Same with shipwrecks. You'll probably notice the Cerberus down there at the bottom, and the fact that it came out of the Victorian Navy before Federation, and the stories it can tell about the defence of Australia. So let's just look at a couple of examples here. Federation Square. Well, it's not old, it's new, as we all know. Registered in 2019 on the Victorian Heritage Register, only 17 years old at the time. And it's recognised under 5 criteria. And certainly it recognises the pattern of life in Victoria, and the fact that great meeting places like this in the city, and particularly on the Yarra, are very important to Victorians and have been for such a long period of time. In terms of principal characteristics of a class, there are few squares on this scale, and with such interest and vibrancy and versatility. Criterion E there for its aesthetic characteristics. It is, well, I think people have grown to like it. I do remember John Fain on ABC radio when it was newly opened. He said, "Oh, don't judge it yet. Wait till the buildings have settled and righted themselves, and then make your judgment." But that way that it's shaped and the way it is quirky and stands in contrast to the dead straight reaching skyscrapers behind and the St Paul's Cathedral with its colonial Gothic sort of look, it really does stand out with an aesthetic characteristic. Criterion F there, technical achievement. The building of the place, and particularly the way the facades of the buildings are so complex, and the way that each of those facets on the building is different, and every facet joins seamlessly with the facet beside it. That really is a technical achievement, but it's also making a statement about connection and about how diverse Victoria is. So it's a fabulous achievement from that point of view. And just to look there at criterion G with connection to present day community, I think every Victorian knows it. Certainly everyone who passes through Melbourne pays attention to it. And I think we're now getting to the point where it's changed from I'll meet you under the clocks at the station to I'll meet you in Fed Square. All right, Great Ocean Road. Well, that's not a building. It's a fabulous engineering project along the coast. And without going through all those criteria again, that's going to be a little bit laborious, but certainly to pick out the fact that it's recognised also under criterion H, which is that it has a special connection with a group or community within Victorian history. And that in particular is ex-servicemen who were employed after the First World War from 1919, 1920 onwards as an employment program for them, but one that also helped to achieve significant engineering outcomes and opened up that part of the coast so that people could come and enjoy the Great Ocean Road, the magnificent attraction that it is today. And I'm going to now briefly look at some of the objects at Bonegilla, and objects clearly not a building, and also they're not that old. That image there at the top of the buildings that they're housed in is at the migrant camp, and they are ex-army huts, the old P-series huts, and they were used as a migrant camp after the war. So those who were coming to Australia from Europe in that first wave of post-war migration came through the camp. And the objects that they brought with them and the things that they used, several of those are what we call objects integral to understanding the place itself. All right, misconception number 4. When a place or object is identified as heritage, it cannot be used or changed anymore. I argue that the best way to protect a building is to use it. A building that has its services running, those services are maintained. A building that's being used that develops a minor fault, that can be found before the fault becomes any bigger. And it also keeps out vermin, keeps out termites and mice and that sort of thing that will do damage to a property. And it also allows a building to be enjoyed and to be celebrated. Now, heritage buildings certainly can be changed. And just looking at some of those figures there, in the first quarter of this year, that's 2024, 47 permits were issued for properties that are listed on the Victorian Heritage Register. And I should mention permits, that when a property is registered, it can be registered with permit exemptions, which allows people to make all sorts of changes, alterations, modifications, maintenance, and so on, without having to seek a permit. And that is determined when it's registered. So changes certainly can be made at that time, but also permits can be sought to make changes, and that's at the state level. And the cost of works that have been done this year, just within that quarter, are $750 million. So we're not talking about screwing a hook into a wall or something like that. We're talking about significant works. And I'd just like to briefly talk about an example. And I like this example. It's a house known as Park Life, and it's in the Champion Road Estate Heritage Precinct. So it's not listed at the state level, but it is listed under or covered under a local heritage overlay. It was part of that Garden City movement that was probably common in Britain in particular in the 1890s or a bit later, and then came to Australia with the turn of the century and really picked up during the 1920s and 30s and going on into the 1940s. That notion that a precinct, a suburb, a part of a suburb should be livable, and it should be family friendly, and it should be a safe and welcoming environment with parks integrated and so on. The best example worldwide, I guess, is Cadbury over in the UK with the Cadbury chocolate factory, where the owners of the factory built an entire township beside the factory along those lines, so that the workers felt comfortable and happy and had a good home life, and therefore going to work well for the company. All those notions came to Australia, and there are some celebrated examples in Melbourne in particular, where the Burley Griffins designed such garden cities. But this is one that is in the western suburbs, and it is largely intact. And the plans I'll just show you there. On the left is as it was built, and a relatively spacious block for the size of the house. And you can see the construction of the building there. You can see those boxes joined together, forming the various rooms of the place. But I guess families later may have outgrown it. And let's look at the changes there on the right. And the astute will immediately notice that walls have been knocked down between the old one of rooms 3 and 4. You'll see there's a wall that's been taken down there. And you'll also see that there's been a wall put up that creates a flowing passage through the building that wasn't there before. So rather than everything opening off a central room, there's now a flow right through. So it's really quite a different way of living. It's quite a different concept. And the old box idea has been added to with a curved addition on the left there with a glass window. And I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. But you can see the changes were made to adapt to modern living, but are still within that heritage precinct. And certainly that was allowed. And you'll see that they've been quite tasteful in the way they've done it. They've retained that 1940s character while adding new dimensions that allow for a more modern way of living. So certainly heritage properties can be changed. Misconception number 5, the last of our misconceptions to have a look at today: heritage buildings cannot be sustainable. Well, in terms of heritage buildings, the investment has already been made. The environmental cost has already been borne. The bricks have already been fired in the kiln. The trees have already been cut down. The tiles have already been made. The roofing iron has already been dug up out of the ground. So to see that happen again for a new build, you are wasting, or not wasting, but you are not using that energy that's already been invested in a way that really could. Some of the older materials have a longevity that will outlast newer materials. A lot of that's based on cost these days. Cost of labour has put the price of materials up. Labour wasn't so expensive previously. So I'm thinking of things like corrugated iron. If you've ever re-roofed heritage property, you pull off the old iron, which I argue you shouldn't do in most cases. It's really heavy. You put the new stuff up and it's really, really light. And the treatments on it are not going to last as long as well. So I also look at things like the way we retrofit services into buildings. That certainly can be done. And in fact, that's been done possibly several times to heritage buildings anyway. When you think back through the some of the older houses, certainly ones that I've lived in, started off with let's say an open wood burning fireplace, and everybody said, "Oh, it's terrible for your health. We're going to have to get rid of that. Let's put in these new oil heaters." So everybody then got an oil heater, and there was an oil tank on the outside, and pipes ran into the house, and so on. And people burnt oil, and they said, "Oh, that's no good. You really should have gas. It's much quicker, and it heats up better, and it's more efficient and easier to use." So in went all of these gas heaters, and then everybody was saying, "Oh no, we can't go heating your house that way." It's several things wrong with that environmentally. So you now have to use reverse cycle aircon, and they weren't terribly efficient. So we've now gone to solar and hydronic systems in several cases as well. So it's the same building, but these services have been fitted through, and the services come and the services go as technology improves. Hot water heaters, they have changed as well. I mean, I could name, most services. Your power points these days are often solar powered instead of just running directly from the mains. Uh, I'm going to look at one last example here, and that is Jack's Magazine. This started out as an ammunition depot at Maribyrnong. Clearly, we don't need ammunition depots at Maribyrnong anymore, so we could have simply knocked down the building and perhaps built something somewhere else. But this is a wonderful example of adaptive reuse. And you can see the bottom there. You can see the powder magazine and ammunition magazine sort of shape to the building. A wonderful space. It has a fantastic ambience to it. You can see the timber floors there that are in remarkable condition and just great to feel and use. Timber, of course, because if you dropped something made of steel on a concrete floor in a powder magazine, you got a spark and the whole thing went up. Or if you scuffed the hobnails of your boots and created a spark. So timber was very important, and we don't see that much timber these days in such large quantities. So it really has an attraction for us, and that's made it also into a event venue, art exhibition space. You can book it for it can be booked for several types of functions. But the sustainability there is great. They are using solar power. They have their own solar power generation capability there. And the building and the complex, well, in fact, it's a complex of buildings, I believe, they are powered by sustainable means. So it is a clear case that you don't have to pull down to be able to make a building green, and retrofit several things with insulation and so on to make it very much usable these days. And its lifespan will endure. So that energy that was invested in the start, which was considerable, has been saved, and we aren't investing new energy in something else that perhaps may not have the same lifespan. So in conclusion, I would like to say that please continue to enjoy the Heritage Festival. It's a wonderful activity. I think there are something like 300 plus events on the calendar, and several of those certainly take my attention, and I hope you find some time to get out and see some of those for yourselves. We also have on our website for the Heritage Council of Victoria, we have a Heritage Information Pack. And please go to our site. You'll just find us quite simply by a Google search and look under Heritage Information Pack. There are so many heritage resources we have there to assist people with their heritage homes or places they want to visit, or just understanding heritage and the heritage system better. One great example that is coming up in the Heritage Festival is Botanica. That's at Ripponlea. Not only is it listed on the State Victorian Heritage Register, but it's on the National Heritage List as well. And that's a wonderful way of seeing so many things in the one event. You can go into Ripponlea, the mansion, and see it, but also enjoy the fantastic gardens associated with it. And it is 50 years since the formation of the Victorian Heritage Register, and we are celebrating that this year, pulling out all the stops to make sure that we can get people to understand the Heritage Register a little bit better, to see what it has to offer, and hopefully broaden their horizons and find extra ways that you can engage with heritage. So thank you very much, everybody, for being with me today. Thank you very much for taking part in the National Trust's Heritage Festival. And on behalf of the Heritage Council of Victoria, I hope you enjoy the festival more, and thank you so much. If you have some questions, I will see if they are coming up in the chat, and I will try and address your questions as best I can. One question here: is there an impact from new types of materials like solar panels on a property? That's a good question. I could be very smug and say, yes, there's an impact. There's a positive impact because it's going to make the building more sustainable. But I do understand the point more broadly in terms of what damage solar panels might do in terms of fitting them. Any services that are changed in a building has some impact on the building. And if I go back to things like those ways of heating buildings, you often had to knock out a few bricks to be able to get the wider gas burner in, and the later Canara wood heater in, and so on. All of these things, I guess, are small costs. Certainly in terms of corrugated iron on a roof, it's quite easy to fit to that and through to the underlying rafters, and relatively easy to patch up afterwards if and when solar panels become obsolete and the new technology comes in that makes solar panels invisible or light or some other means of generating electricity. So yes, it does. It is positive overall, but yes, there can be some damage, and particularly to slate buildings perhaps, but there are very clever ways that you can mount brackets that go up under and over slate and reduce the damage on those. So solar panels, I would encourage those, fit them wherever you possibly can, and seek advice if you're concerned about whether you're going to be doing any damage to the property. There's always a way of doing it in a sensitive, heritage sensitive manner. Thank you so much for the question. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me, and bye for now.